So I'll keep going on coronavirus because I'm actually interested in that. So have you been following MERS?
Oh yes, MERS, yeah.
Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome?
Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus. Yeah. Last I heard, the case count is up to, what, 138 confirmed and 60 fatalities?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Sounds about right, yeah. So
that might have been accurate only as of 3 or 4 days ago.
Well, it directly ties into your book, too, because, I mean, they're looking at possible animal reservoirs for it. They're looking at bats. They're looking at camels as well, I believe. And
absolutely, yeah. But I saw one study that said that they had somebody had sampled camels in Egypt, camels that had been imported to Egypt, and they found the prevalence of antibodies against MERS something, I think it was 100%, or anyway, it was very, very high.
Yeah, and so now there's controversies over it. The bat paper, looking at base pairs, like 140 base pairs for a blast match. But I gotta wonder, are you sitting there just kind of rubbing your hands, saying, "Look, I told you guys"?
Well, no. What I am saying, and I've said this in a lecture, I think a lecture or two since then, and I might have said part of it in an op-ed about 2 weeks ago for the International New York Times. I am not in position to say I told you so, because I follow the experts around and talk to the experts. But there's a wonderful man named Donald Burke, who is dean of I think it's the School of Public Health at the University of Pittsburgh Medical School, who told me when I interviewed him 4 years ago, and who told the world about 12 years ago or 15 years ago that, look, if you're trying to be vigilant as to what the next big one will be, the next new emerging disease that potentially could kill lots of people and be really bad, then Don Burke said, first of all, it'll probably be almost certainly it'll be a zoonosis. It'll come out of a non-human animal host. Almost certainly it'll be a virus. And then which kind of virus will it be? Well, it'll probably be a virus that has high evolvability. What does that mean? Well, a high mutation rate, recombination or reassortment of its genome. Which ones are those? Well, the single-stranded RNA viruses mainly, meaning retroviruses, coronaviruses, paramyxoviruses, a couple other groups of viruses of which the genomes are single-stranded RNA. Therefore, high rates of mutation, also combined sometimes with, like in the influenzas, readily reassorting their genomic segments. Anyway, high evolvability, lots of genetic variation rolling in all the time, high population levels, and therefore the ability to take hold in a new kind of host, a new species of host. So that's what we need to be aware of. So anyway, back to MERS. So 15 years ago, Don Burke was saying, watch out for coronaviruses. And then SARS emerged in 2003. It was a coronavirus. And now MERS emerged, and they've been watching it very carefully all over the world, despite the fact that the numbers are pretty small, 138 cases, 60 fatalities. But Ian Lipkin from New York, from Columbia University in New York, was one of the people on that bats paper, one of the people who went to, I think, Bisha in eastern Saudi Arabia and did the work, found evidence, at least some evidence, of the virus in bats. People all over the world are watching that one because they know that that's what the next big one could look like. Except for the fact that, as far as we know so far, MERS coronavirus has high lethality, but high virulence, but not high transmissibility from human to human, fortunately.
So can we get an on-air prediction as to what you think the reservoir will be?
Of MERS?
Yeah.
The people that I know and the people that I trust are looking at bats. I think the bat is the logical first hypothesis. And we don't want to demonize bats. Everybody out there, ladies and gentlemen, bats are very important. Bats are good creatures. I think it's important. I forget to put in that parenthetical disclaimer about bats, but I realize more and more it's necessary to say, even though it seems very obvious. bats are very, very important contributors to their ecosystems. So if we find more and more of these nasty viruses that have their reservoir host in bats, the solution is not to kill bats. The solution is to leave bats alone.
That's actually a good point. Yeah.
So I had a question about some of your other books where you've written reasonably extensively on Charles Darwin, but he's not a person about whom there's a lack of general writing. So I was just wondering what you thought was missing from the narrative that you wanted to add.
Well, you're absolutely right, Tom. I was asked. I did a small biography of Darwin for a series of small biographies that was originally going to be published by Penguin Books, and then the series was discontinued by Penguin. I had not yet delivered my book, and the series was taken up by W.W. Norton. The series was conceived by a wonderful editor and biographer named James Atlas, who is a real believer in short, concise biography as a form. And I've known him for just about 40 years, and he came to me at one point and said, "David, I'm going to do this series of short biographies, and I'd like you to do Darwin." And I said to him, "Well, Jim, Darwin has already been really well served by long, comprehensive, authoritative biographies. There was the one by Adrian Desmond and James Moore, and then there was the wonderful 2-volume biography by Janet Brown. I think very highly of both those books, or all 3 of those books." I said that to Jim. Darwin has been really well served by big, long biographies. And what he said to me was, "That's fine. Those are not your competition. Those are your starting point. Those are your resources. The task to you is to create a radically concise biographical essay on Charles Darwin, his life and work, for people who will not read 1,200 pages of Janet Brown, who will not read 800 pages of Desmond Moore, but who might read 200 pages of a radically concise essayistic biography of Darwin that has a distinctive literary voice." So that's what I tried to do. That's what I tried to supply, and I had a great time doing it.
I really like that you start from after he gets back from the voyage of the Beagle.
Good, thank you. That was sort of a counterintuitive decision. I mean, every biography of Darwin, every story of Darwin begins with here's this young man and he goes off on the voyage of the Beagle and he goes to the Galapagos, etc., etc. I just decided to treat that almost as a given, to dismiss that in a few sentences and say, look, everybody who knows a little bit about Darwin knows that. So let's start from the point when he arrives back in England after the voyage of the Beagle, and he begins what is the most intellectually dramatic and outwardly undramatic period of his life. The 2 years when he's a young single man living in London right after the voyage of the Beagle, working in his little private notebooks, little things like that, his transmutation notebooks, to brainstorm his way to a theory of evolution. So that's what I began with.
Hey, I gotta defend the voyage of the Beagle, because I mean, everybody knows about the voyage of the Beagle, sure, that's what he did, but nobody really knows that he was such a badass when he was doing it. Right? You know, he's running around South America in the middle of revolutions, and nobody knows this about Darwin.
I guess not, unless they've read the actual book, Journal of Researches, which is republished as The Voyage of the Beagle, or read one of the long biographies. Yeah, it's true that people are vaguely aware that Darwin went off on a boat called the Beagle, and vaguely aware that he went to the Galapagos. But there's a lot about that they don't realize. You're absolutely right, Stephen.
Now that we're kind of talking about your character portraits that you brought up earlier, and taking a different angle on sharing the world and the life of Darwin, I think that you write some of the most engaging profiles of the scientists that you include in your books, and you really humanize them and allow your reader to connect to them, which is, I think, in this time and day and age, is a really important aspect to make people think that they're not just robots, doing robotic things. And you've beyond that, you've interviewed people from everyone from guides in the middle of the jungle to grad students working on projects who are just at the beginning of their careers to superstars like Jane Goodall. And you transition between them, and you give them all equal respect and attention in your books in outlining these portraits. Do you find it difficult to write these sort of things, or what is it about it that, of these narrative aspects of it, that you like to bring into it?
Well, people like to read about people, and I'm always aware of that. Even when you're writing about science, you're writing about theoretical ecology or evolutionary biology, the ideas and the data are very, very interesting. They're certainly very interesting to us four and to other people, but they're not necessarily interesting to a broad audience. What can make them interesting to a broad audience is the human element, the people, the characters, and the narratives, the stories that go with the people, the process of doing the science. So that's what I write about. I always look for human characters to sort of carry the ideas and carry the work. And as often as not, those are people who are not the superstars, not famous. I mean, I love the opportunity to interview Jane Goodall, or to talk with Robert Gallo, to hang out a little bit with Richard Dawkins, and interview Edward O. Wilson and others. But those people have all been written about a lot of times, and have written about themselves and their own work and their vision of the work a lot of times, and some of them are very good writers. You know, people like Dawkins and Ed Wilson and Jane. What's more exciting, or what's exciting in a completely different way, is to find the graduate student or the postdoc who is not yet famous, but who deserves to be famous and is doing this incredible work, but who the world doesn't know about. Like that paper that I held up, Brandon Keele, K-E-E-L-E, doing the work out of Beatrice Hahn's lab. She was at Alabama, the University of Alabama at Birmingham at that time. And he was the lead on that particular project, taking fecal samples from chimpanzees that had been collected all over Africa and extracting simian immunodeficiency virus strains from them and amplifying what he found and sequencing them, and then creating a phylogenetic tree to establish exactly where in space the original fateful spillover of what became the pandemic strain of HIV occurred. I mean, that's just wonderfully mind-boggling scientific work. But nobody in the general public has heard of Brandon Keele, so it was fun for me to call on him. He's working in where is he working? I think I should know this, and I'm sorry that I don't. But at one of the institutes in Maryland, Frederick, Maryland. I don't know if he's part of the one of the branches of the NIH. Anyway, he's continuing his HIV research there, and so I went and called on him there. I didn't get to go into the field with him. He's not so much a field guy; he's a laboratory guy. But finding somebody like that, or some graduate student or postdoc who is doing the field end of that work, and telling his or her human story, is what presents to me a really exciting opportunity as a science writer.
Well, when you write your second book on viruses, you can give me a call. You can make me famous.
Okay. All right, Stephen.
You can't, because
virus in the Northern Territory. Find a zoonotic virus that spills over from saltwater crocodiles, and I'll be there next week.
Damn it! If only I did anything other than computer modeling. All right.
That's important.
Actually, no. I gotta say, I mean, you in the book you talk about all these researchers in virology and people I've read about but never met, like Eddie Holmes and Jenny Corey, and
he's in Australia now. Eddie has
left. Yeah, he is. He's actually
gone to Australia.
He's actually in the city. I just haven't been able to track him down yet.
He's a wonderful guy. You should talk to him.
Well, I feel like I know half of them now, and I've never met any of them. you know, and then it comes just from reading your book. It's a testament to your character descriptions, because I feel like I know these people.
Well, Eddie Holmes is an excellent example of somebody who is a wonderfully fascinating character, even if you don't get to walk through a jungle with him. Maybe you only go into his bare ascetic office in College Station, Pennsylvania, and you see what's on the walls, and you see what's on his computer, and you talk to him. I loved getting to meet and talk with Eddie Holmes, and then getting to write about him afterwards. And he was very helpful to me too. He's an exemplary scientist who is a cool human being, as well as being a brainy guy.
And you talked to Robert May too, didn't you, for that book?
I never did talk to May. No.
Oh, you didn't. You wrote about him, but you didn't.
I wrote about him. I thought about calling on him, trying to see him, and then it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
You can only talk to so many people.
And you've talked to a lot of them, especially in Spillover, where you have a lot of different people involved. So I gotta assume that if somebody were to call me and I look down at my phone and it says David Quammen is calling me, I assume that I'm gonna fanboy again. I would probably freak out a little bit that you're calling me assumingly to talk about research. So how do these reactions kind of change when you talk to grad students who have assumably read your work versus some of the higher ups? Do you get as equal excitement from them to talk to you as you develop from talking to them about the research?
Well, oops, that's my phone. Hold on a second. Sorry.
It's exciting new researcher, I'm sure.
And I know it's my orthopedic surgeon. I've got to have knee surgery here pretty soon. The reactions. Well, I'm always grateful if I can just get my foot in the door. If I contact somebody like Bob Gallo or Robert May or Eddie Holmes or Peter Hudson or any of these people who have big reputations in this field. Either I expect them to say David who, in which case I'll explain myself and try and get in the door, or if they have any awareness of my work, then I hope that they will simply say, oh, okay, you've got a pretty good reputation for accuracy. I read something that you did. You didn't screw up too badly. I'll give you a chance. Scientists have every reason to be wary of journalists because too many journalists are in a hurry and are sloppy and get the facts wrong. It's particularly true, I'm afraid, of newspaper journalists because they have deadlines that are measured in hours and not in days or weeks or years, and they tend not to be able to or think to double-check their facts, and if you don't double-check your facts, your facts are always going to be 35% wrong. So I try and do all those things. I try and keep faith with my scientific sources, so they'll sort of pay it forward in terms of a reputation for being one of the more reliable, more conscientious, rather than less reliable, less conscientious of my particular professional guild. It takes a long time to do that, and it's still very routine for me to call up scientists and have them say, who the hell are you? Why should I talk to you? But in a lot of cases they say yes and let me come and talk to them, which is great.
That leads into a current issue in science writing right now, which is, of course, as you mentioned, the decline in science journalism generally. I mean, there's been a lot of ink spilled over the fact that many science desks on major newspapers have shut down entirely. There's layoffs all over the place. I thought I read somewhere the other day there's like 5 full-time science writers left in the United States or something like that at major newspapers. Well, I probably have that number wrong, but I'm wondering.
No, that might be right. I don't know. Yeah.
I'm wondering how you feel about the current state of science journalism and what you think the future of it is.
Well, I think it's really important. I think society values it. Journalism is changing. The media are changing. I mean, here we're doing this thing, which is very different from anything I would have done or anybody would have done 10 or 20 years ago. But I think the public still has a strong sense that science is very important, science is very powerful, science is crucial, and science is also really obscure and confusing, so somebody's got to explain it to us. I think that there's going to continue to be an important role for science journalists, even if daily newspapers are dying. And so maybe there are many fewer full-time employed science reporters on newspapers in, for instance, the U.S. than there were 10 years ago. But I go occasionally to these meetings of the National Association of Science Writers or another meeting called Science Online. And I went to both those meetings last year. I'm not a very good meeting goer, but I did go to both those last year, and I'm going to National Association of Science Writers this year. There'll be 2,000 people there, all of whom are making a living, full-time or part-time, as science journalists. I think that even though newspapers are not thriving, I think science journalism is thriving. There's a lot of science bloggers out there. Some of them are really well known. I've got highly respected colleagues that I stay in touch with, like Ed Young and Carl Zimmer and Seth Mnuchin and Maren McKenna and a number of others who do much of their writing online and are reaching big audiences with important science reporting.
How about the audiences? I mean, you connect probably more with them than we do, even though we all do, some sort of science communication as well. But, what do you feel about the audience for science writing? Is it something that's increasing? Is it, are there things that they're looking for that maybe we're not providing? Or
Well, I hope that it's increasing. I think a lot about audience. With every sentence that I write, I'm thinking about audience. Who is the audience, and how can I stay connected to that audience? How can I expand that audience? Although I think when I write, I think about writing to a single person. To you, Stephen, or you, Morgan, or you, Tom. Still, I want to be reaching a large audience. I think that the way to do that is to think about what the audience wants as well as what the audience needs. The audience wants human stories. The audience wants clarity. The audience wants surprise, suspense. Occasionally, the audience wants humor, something to relieve the tension, to relieve the demands, the concentration of reading, 2 solid paragraphs about molecular phylogenetics. At the end of that, maybe you need to tell some sort of a bad joke, or preferably a good joke, just to get the audience to crack a smile.
Ebola.
yeah, something like that. Or maybe it's mathematics. Maybe you're explaining a mathematical model. You're introducing an equation. I love occasionally to introduce an equation onto the page in my writing, but I've occasionally been criticized for this, but I've also been thanked for it. I say, brace yourselves, everybody. Close your eyes if you're squeamish, and here comes an equation. All right, you can open them now, and we'll move on. But I like to show people what mathematical ecology looks like. It's like showing them the face of a tarantula. Look at this. This is really interesting. You don't have to find this cuddly or beautiful in order to appreciate how interesting and strange it is. So that's how I think of mathematical equations. I put them in the same category as close-up of the face of a tarantula.
All right,
we were that awesome.
Tom, Morgan, you bastards. I'm using that in the future.
I should add that I'm a recovering arachnophobe.
Well, they're the bug guys, and I do the math, so I use that one. All right. Tom?
So I just wanted to go back to earlier on. I made the mistake of asking a 2-part question, and then we segued away from it. But I just wanted to get your opinions on what makes a readable scientific paper from your kind of viewpoint.
Yeah. Well, a readable scientific paper is one with a really clear abstract and very straightforward presentation of what the important findings are and how they relate to the data, and then materials and methods and site and all that can be pushed to the end. But some people would criticize the writers of scientific papers for writing in a particular form, passive voice, very dry, very concise and impacted. I don't have any quarrels with that. Scientific papers are what they are. I don't expect them to read like the lead sentence in a Richard Dawkins essay or something that I would be proud of having written. They have very different purposes and very different standards. So clarity, conciseness, and substantiveness are what I care about. There are some scientists who have written some very lively, imaginative scientific papers, published as journal papers. I think of Dan Jansen, the great tropical ecologist, who in, I think, the 1980s was writing things for journals like the Annual Review of Ecology and Systematics, under titles like "Why Be a Fig," or with imaginative titles like the Ambitions of a Dandelion. I can't remember his titles, but Dan Jansen was exceptional. He could write scientific articles that would make you say, wow, this guy can write. That's above and beyond the Call of Duty.
Awesome. Well, we've reached pretty much the end of the time, so I'd like to really thank you for giving us some time and speaking to us today about such a wide variety of topics. If people want to follow your travels and your writing, where would be the best place for them to find you online or to follow what you're doing?
Well, I'm on Twitter at David Quammen. I write regularly for National Geographic magazine, and I have a few things coming out in forthcoming issues. My website is davidquammen.com. I can't claim that I keep my blog up on a daily basis, but there's a lot of information there and links to some of my past work and things like that at the website www.davidquammen.com. But I'm out there in what I guess we have come to call the Twitterverse.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us today. And
hey, thank you guys. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I feel like the four of us have been having a beer at a good brew pub somewhere, except we happen to be on 4 different continents.
Yeah, exactly. Hooray for social media in that regard.
Yeah, I guess so. All right, good to talk with you all. Thanks for your interest, and thanks for the nice things you said about my work, and more importantly, keep up your own interesting work. Find that new virus that makes me come knocking on your door.
All right, I'll see what I can do.
Okay.
Challenge accepted.
Okay. All right, ciao.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So this has been Breaking Bio, and if you'd like to find us online, we're at breakingbio.com or on Twitter at breakingbio. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.